Hollywood once promised fame and fortune, and for its brightest actresses, safety behind a polished image. But history tells a darker story. Stars like Thelma Todd, Peg Entwistle, and Elizabeth Short met ends so bizarre their true causes remain in dispute even now. Why did powerful studios fight to bury the facts? And what secrets slipped through the cracks? Here is where these mysterious deaths and the industry's obsession with control begin to unravel. Thelma Todd's name lit up marquees across the country in the early 1930s. Known as the Ice Cream Blonde, she starred in comedies alongside Zasu Pitts and the Marx Brothers, drawing crowds with her quick wit and easy charm. But on December 16, 1935, her body was discovered slumped behind the wheel of her own car, parked inside a garage above her popular cafe on the Pacific Coast Highway. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled the cause as acute carbon monoxide poisoning, officially labeling the death an accident. Yet from the start, the case was anything but clear-cut. Press headlines swirled with rumors of mob connections, suggesting ties to gangster Lucky Luciano and ongoing disputes with her business partner, Roland West. Some reports suggested Todd had suffered facial bruising, a broken nose, or even cracked ribs, details that seemed to clash with the coroner's summary, which noted only minor injuries consistent with carbon monoxide exposure. Police interviews and grand jury testimony revealed no signs of struggle or robbery, and no charges were ever filed. Still, speculation only grew as the studio publicity machine moved into action, urging restraint in coverage and steering the narrative away from scandal. Missing evidence, conflicting witness accounts, and the rapid conclusion of the investigation left the public with more questions than answers. While the official record stands as accidental death, the gaps in documentation and the persistent whispers of foul play continue to fuel debate nearly a century later. Peg Entwistle arrived in Los Angeles carrying the hopes of a Broadway starlet, eager for a new beginning. In the spring of 1932, she left behind a string of acclaimed stage roles in New York, drawn by the promise of Hollywood's expanding film world. But the city's golden lights offered little warmth to newcomers. She landed a part in RKO's 13 Women, only to see most of her performance cut from the final release. Studio contracts grew scarce as the Depression deepened, and the sharp contrast between her early reviews and the reality of endless auditions weighed heavily on her. Letters to friends preserved in the New York Public Library reveal a woman shaken by rejection, writing that she felt out of place and fearing she would never be good enough. On the night of September 16, 1932, Peg climbed the steep slope beneath the Hollywoodland sign. She scaled a workman's ladder to the top of the towering H and jumped. Her body was found the next morning by a hiker. In her purse, police found a short note that read, "I am afraid. I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain. P.E." Within days, a rumor began to circulate. A letter said to have arrived at her uncle's home allegedly offered Peg a starring role in a new film. The story, retold for decades, remains unproven. No copy of the letter has ever surfaced in studio archives or family collections. What endures are the facts. A gifted actress overwhelmed by disappointment, whose name would forever be tied to Hollywood's most haunting landmark. Carol Landis was one of the brightest stars of the 1940s, known for her energy on screen and her tireless support of USO tours during the war. On the evening of July 4, 1948, she hosted a quiet dinner at her home with Rex Harrison, a celebrated actor and close companion. Harrison later told police he left around 1 in the morning, with Landis still awake. By the next day, she was found dead in her bedroom, the result of a sodium barbiturate overdose. The coroner's report listed suicide, but a single missing note would haunt the case for decades. Detectives on the scene reported finding a brief letter, apologetic in tone, addressed ambiguously. The document vanished from official files almost immediately. Studio memos from Fox, preserved in partial form, hint at urgent efforts to manage publicity and limit scandal. Biographers and researchers have searched for any trace of the note in LAPD and studio archives, but no direct record survives. Harrison, questioned by police and the press, denied any involvement in its disappearance. Without this final piece of evidence, the truth behind Carol Landis's last night remains locked away, leaving only rumors and a gap in the historical record. Elizabeth Short arrived in Los Angeles searching for movie roles, but her name would become forever linked to one of the most notorious unsolved murders in American history. On January 15, 1947, her body was found in a vacant lot in Leimert Park, cut in half at the waist, with a level of precision that suggested surgical skill. The autopsy recorded deep lacerations from the corners of her mouth to her ears, flesh removed from her thigh and breast, and evidence that her body had been thoroughly washed before being left in the open. There was no blood at the scene. She had died elsewhere, the result of blunt force trauma and exsanguination. The LAPD and the FBI reviewed hundreds of suspects and leads, but none resulted in an arrest. Short's personal effects, mailed to a newspaper by someone claiming responsibility, had been carefully wiped clean of fingerprints. Press coverage exploded, with headlines dubbing her the Black Dahlia and inventing lurid details that outpaced anything in the coroner's file. Rumors of Hollywood party ties and sadistic torture circulated widely, though official records noted no sexual assault and emphasized the calculated nature of the wounds. Despite decades of theories, the case remains unsolved, its facts increasingly eclipsed by myth and speculation. Barbara Colby's life was on the rise. In the summer of 1975, known for her sharp comic timing on television, she had just wrapped an evening acting class in Los Angeles when she and her colleague, James Kiernan, stepped into the parking lot. Two men approached without warning. Neither spoke a word. Both actors were shot at close range. Colby died instantly. Kiernan, mortally wounded, managed to tell police there had been no robbery, no argument, and no demand, just silence and gunfire. The Los Angeles Police Department found no suspects, no motive, and no links to Colby's personal or professional world. Ballistics confirmed a .38 caliber weapon, but the gun was never found. The case remains unsolved, a story with no answers. Just 5 years later, another actress's death would leave no doubt about the perpetrator, but open new wounds for Hollywood. Dorothy Stratton, a rising star with a promising film career, was murdered by her estranged husband, Paul Snider, on August 14, 1980. The details were clear, the evidence overwhelming, and the legal record complete. Yet the aftermath reached beyond the courtroom. Stratton's story forced the industry and the public to confront the dangers of domestic violence and to question how power and vulnerability could collide behind the scenes. In these two cases, one random and unresolved, the other brutally clear, Hollywood's limits were laid bare. Sometimes justice is impossible, and sometimes the truth is almost too much to bear. A film historian describes a pattern found in studio memos and archived press releases. Throughout the classic era, studios coordinated publicity and managed details released to the public, often shaping the narrative around an actress's death before police investigations had even concluded. Internal correspondence shows executives working closely with trusted columnists, ensuring that only select facts reach the headlines, and sometimes urging authorities to withhold information that might damage a star's reputation or the studio's bottom line. A retired detective adds that forensic methods of the time often left critical gaps, with missing chain of custody logs, incomplete toxicology, and evidence that went missing. He notes that modern investigators reviewing these files frequently encounter contradictions between autopsy findings and police reports, making it nearly impossible to reconstruct events with certainty. The result is a historical record where rumor and fact remain tightly entwined, and the truth behind many of these deaths is still out of reach. Across decades of Hollywood history, the same institutional patterns surface again and again. Studios shaped headlines, and when necessary, they suppressed details that might harm the image of their stars or the bottom line. In the 1930s and the 1940s, publicity departments coordinated with trusted columnists, crafting narratives before police investigations were even complete. Forensic science, limited by the standards of its day, left critical questions unanswered. Missing chain of custody logs, incomplete autopsies, and lost evidence are recurring themes in official files. As media control slipped from the studios to independent tabloids and investigative reporters, the public gained access to more raw information, but also to a flood of speculation and rumor. Today, the line between fact and allegation is drawn with on-screen labels and careful sourcing. The role of fact-checking and sourcing has changed how these stories are told. Each death on the timeline is not just a tragedy, but a reflection of the era's ethics, technology, and power. It is a reminder that truth in Hollywood has always been a negotiated story. Decades later, Hollywood's veil of secrecy still blurs the line between fact and legend. As true crime fascination grows and archives slowly open, the unanswered questions endure. These stories warn us, image can outlive truth, but the cost is a legacy haunted by silence. Share your thoughts below.
I'm gonna f***ing kick your f***ing ass. You know, shut up for a second, all right?
I'll kick your ass, you know. That wasn't a movie line. That was a star on set screaming at a crew member. This is a timeline of Hollywood stars' fury, and it only gets worse. Terry Hatcher's on-set battles. The set of Desperate Housewives looked glamorous on screen, but behind the scenes it was a minefield. Cast and crew whispered about feuds, and one name came up again and again. Reports described constant clashes, cold shoulders, and angry outbursts that made filming one of the most successful shows of the 2000s far from easy. At first, ABC executives brushed it off as gossip. The hit series launched in 2004, and the mix of stars seemed to work, but tensions boiled quickly. By the second season, tabloids leaked stories of explosive fights between Hatcher and her co-stars. One report claimed that Marcia Cross and Felicity Huffman had grown so frustrated with Hatcher's behavior that they staged group interventions to deal with her temper. Crew members recalled sudden mood swings. One day she was warm and friendly, the next she was slamming scripts on tables and shouting about lines. Staff allegedly avoided eye contact to keep from being snapped at during stressful filming days. Entertainment Weekly later reported that producers struggled to keep morale together as fights grew louder and more public. The most famous incident came in 2005 during a Vanity Fair cover shoot featuring the Desperate Housewives cast. According to the magazine's editors, instructions were given to photographers not to let Hatcher stand in the middle of the group. The reason? Rumors that she had been arguing with her castmates off camera and demanding prime placement for herself. The problems didn't stop there. By 2006, whispers from the set called Hatcher the meanest woman in Hollywood. Reports claimed she berated assistants, refused to speak with certain actors, and once stormed off set over a line change. Some co-stars allegedly refused to attend press events with her, forcing publicists to rearrange schedules. Even after the show ended in 2012, the stories continued. Nicolette Sheridan and Eva Longoria both gave interviews hinting that Hatcher was difficult to work with. In 2018, Eva Longoria revealed that producers told guest stars to say hello to everyone, except Terry. It was a blunt warning that summed up years of tension in one sentence. Naomi Campbell's violent outbursts. Hotel staff dreaded late-night calls when her name was on the guest list. The supermodel image was flawless on runways, but away from the cameras, Naomi Campbell's temper became infamous worldwide. In 1998, Campbell pleaded guilty to assault after attacking her personal assistant with a telephone. The assistant testified that a disagreement over travel plans escalated into a screaming fit, ending with Campbell striking her. She received a fine and was ordered to attend anger management. For most stars, that would have been the end of it. For Campbell, it was only the start. By 2000, another assistant filed charges, claiming Campbell hurled a mobile phone during an argument. Reports at the time suggested she threatened to fire staff if they spoke to the press, but lawsuits and settlements kept the stories alive. Each case added fuel to her growing reputation as one of fashion's most volatile figures. In 2006, her behavior made international headlines again. A housekeeper accused Campbell of throwing a BlackBerry at her head over a missing pair of jeans. The incident led to Campbell's arrest in New York. The victim received stitches, and Campbell was sentenced to community service. Tabloids swarmed when she appeared in designer gowns to pick up garbage bags on Manhattan streets as part of her sentence. 2 years later, Heathrow Airport security reported another clash. Campbell was removed from a flight after yelling at police and crew when her luggage was mishandled. Witnesses said she kicked and spit at officers. She was arrested and banned by British Airways. Court records reveal that by 2009, Campbell faced at least 6 accusations of violence from staff and associates. She later admitted in interviews that she struggled with anger, but insisted the media exaggerated her temper. Still, testimony from assistants told a different story. One described walking on eggshells every day, never knowing what would set her off. Even as she continued to book major campaigns, the violent incidents never fully disappeared. In 2010, a driver accused her of slapping him during a drive through Manhattan. In 2015, an Italian court convicted her of assault for throwing a phone at a photographer in Sicily. Richard Burton's drunken blow-ups. The sound of breaking glass often followed him. Richard Burton's talent made him a legend, but his drinking and violent temper created as many headlines as his films. By the 1960s, Burton was one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. He was also drinking more than a bottle of vodka a day, a habit that fueled bar fights and destructive outbursts. Crew members on Cleopatra in 1963 remembered production delays when Burton stumbled in late, hungover, and spoiling for arguments. Elizabeth Taylor, his co-star and soon-to-be wife, often matched his fire, and their public battles became front-page news. One of the most infamous clashes came in 1974 during the filming of The Klansman. Reports say Burton and Lee Marvin, both heavy drinkers, turned the set into chaos. Marvin allegedly pulled a knife after Burton mocked him during a binge, and producers had to separate the two stars before real damage was done. Cast members later admitted the tension on set was unbearable. In public, Burton's temper was no secret. Tabloids reported screaming matches with Taylor in luxury hotels across Europe. In 1975, during their second marriage, guests at a London party recalled Burton throwing a drink across the room during a fight, shattering glasses as shocked onlookers froze. Hotel managers often billed studios thousands of dollars for damages after the couple's late-night rows. By the late 1970s, the behavior escalated into violence. During a trip to Sardinia, Italian police detained Burton after a bar fight with locals turned into a brawl. Witnesses reported he smashed a bottle during the scuffle, and though charges were dropped, newspapers across Europe carried the story. Faye Dunaway's legendary tantrums. Crew members used to joke that the call sheet should come with a warning label. Faye Dunaway, star of Bonnie and Clyde and Chinatown, was as famous for her talent as for the volcanic temper that followed her from set to set. During the making of Chinatown in 1974, director Roman Polanski recalled daily clashes. Dunaway often challenged his directions and, at one point, reportedly threw a cup of liquid at him in anger. Polanski later claimed he once pulled a strand of her hair to demonstrate a scene, an incident that sparked a screaming match in front of cast and crew. Jack Nicholson, her co-star, admitted the tension was so thick that entire days of shooting became unbearable. Her outbursts weren't limited to sets. Assistants told stories of constant fear. One former employee claimed she threw objects when displeased, including a script and, in one disputed account, a cup filled with urine when she wasn't taken to a restroom quickly enough. Whether exaggerated or not, the rumors cemented her image as one of Hollywood's most difficult stars. By the 1980s, the reputation grew worse. While working on the film Mommy Dearest in 1981, Dunaway delivered a performance that critics later said blurred the line between acting and her real-life temper. Rumors circulated that she slapped actors off camera to heighten their fear during scenes, creating an atmosphere of constant dread. The most famous collapse came in 1994. Dunaway had been cast as Norma Desmond in Andrew Lloyd Webber's stage version of Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. Within weeks, reports of tantrums filled the theater world. Stagehands said she berated them daily, screamed at crew for minor mistakes, and refused to follow blocking instructions. Webber himself shut down the production and fired Dunaway before opening night, an extraordinary move that sent shockwaves through Broadway and Hollywood alike. Her reputation by then was legendary. Publicists described productions reshuffling schedules to manage her mood swings. Directors quietly warned each other about the risks. Even established stars admitted they were wary of sharing scenes with her, knowing a single misstep could trigger a tirade. Klaus Kinski's on-set madness. The jungles of Peru echoed with gunfire during the filming of Aguirre, The Wrath of God, in 1972, and it wasn't part of the script. German actor Klaus Kinski, hired to play a conquistador, erupted into such fury at local extras that he fired a rifle into their tent. One man lost part of his finger. Crew members scattered in fear, but for Kinski, it was just another day. Director Werner Herzog, who collaborated with him on 5 films, often said working with Kinski was like taming a wild animal. Their partnership produced cinematic masterpieces, but behind the camera, it was war. During Aguirre, Herzog claimed he threatened to shoot Kinski and then himself if the actor tried to abandon the production. Extras later offered to kill Kinski for Herzog, an offer the director admitted he considered before declining. The pattern continued on Fitzcarraldo in 1982. The shoot, already grueling in the Amazon, turned into a nightmare as Kinski screamed for hours over minor issues. He demanded rewrites, threw fits about the food, and even attacked a crew member with a sword, leaving the man with a severe head wound. Locals on set said they lived in constant fear, not of the jungle, but of Kinski. Herzog documented the madness in his 1999 film My Best Fiend. He described Kinski threatening to walk off set unless every detail bent to his will. In one account, Herzog said he kept a gun close at hand in case Kinski turned violent again. The stories sounded unbelievable, but Herzog swore they were true, and survivors of the shoots backed him up. What made Kinski even more disturbing was how openly he bragged about his behavior. In his autobiography, All I Need Is Love, later retitled Kinski Uncut, he admitted to violent fits, insults toward directors, and absolute contempt for anyone who stood in his way. He called Herzog a miserable, hateful creep in print, even after the two had created some of the most famous films in German cinema. Sharon Stone's Diva Rage. Producers in the 1990s knew they were dealing with a star who could stop a set cold. Sharon Stone rose to international fame with Basic Instinct in 1992, but along with the spotlight came a reputation for explosive anger that spread through Hollywood. During the filming of Casino in 1995, reports surfaced that Stone clashed with director Martin Scorsese over costume choices and long shooting schedules. Crew members recalled her storming off set in full wardrobe, yelling about not being respected, and refusing to return until changes were made. Though her performance later earned an Academy Award nomination, insiders admitted the behind-the-scenes battles nearly derailed production. Stories from other sets painted the same picture. On Sphere in 1998, co-star Samuel L. Jackson hinted in interviews that Stone's temper created tension during filming. Crew accounts claim she shouted at makeup artists and costume staff, sometimes in front of the entire cast, leaving production assistants scrambling to smooth things over. Her behavior extended beyond film sets. Flight attendants once told tabloids she berated crew on a plane after being offered the wrong seat, shouting until staff moved other passengers to accommodate her. At charity events, assistants described her snapping at organizers when schedules ran late. One event planner said she reduced staff to tears over the color of flowers at a gala dinner. In 2000, Stone faced a lawsuit from a nanny who accused her of verbal abuse. The nanny claimed Stone screamed daily, demanded impossible tasks, and created a hostile work environment. While the case was eventually settled, it fueled a media storm about her reputation. By the mid-2000s, industry insiders openly questioned if Stone's behavior had cost her roles. Reports linked her temper to stalled negotiations and directors choosing other actresses rather than risk unpredictable clashes. Crew who worked with her later told reporters that she could be warm and charismatic one moment, then furious the next, often over details no one else found important. Tommy Lee Jones's cold fury. Ask anyone who's walked a red carpet with him, and the warning is the same: don't expect a smile. Tommy Lee Jones built a career on playing hard-nosed characters, but off-screen he carried that same icy temper into real life. During the filming of Batman Forever in 1995, Jim Carrey tried to break the tension by approaching his co-star at a restaurant. Carrey later told interviewers that Jones stood up, hugged him stiffly, and whispered, "I cannot sanction your buffoonery." From then on, Jones refused to eat with him, avoided him on set, and made it clear he didn't want to share scenes. Carrey admitted the hostility shook him during filming. On Men in Black in 1997, Will Smith ran into the same wall of coldness. Director Barry Sonnenfeld revealed he often had to act as a buffer between Jones and Smith because Jones dismissed Smith's upbeat style as unprofessional. While their on-screen chemistry worked, crew members described the off-camera atmosphere as strained and uncomfortable. His temper extended to press tours. Journalists recounted interviews that ended in silence or with Jones walking out if a question annoyed him. At the Golden Globes in 2013, cameras caught him glaring while others laughed during a comedy bit, an expression so harsh it went viral as "Grumpy Tommy." Insiders say his behavior wasn't explosive in the way of other stars, no flying objects or public brawls, but the sharpness of his contempt cut just as deep. He was known to shut down assistants with a single glare and to freeze entire sets when he grew impatient with delays. Crew often warned newcomers to keep their questions brief and never try small talk. Even directors who praised his acting admitted he was one of the most intimidating presences in Hollywood. Joel Schumacher, who directed Batman Forever, once said working with Jones was like walking on eggshells, knowing one wrong word could set him off. The pattern repeated for decades, whether it was Carrey's comedy, Smith's enthusiasm, or a reporter's casual remark. Jones responded with disdain that turned rooms cold. What audiences saw on screen was authority and grit. What colleagues saw was a man who made every workplace tense the moment he entered. The audio leaked in 2009, and the internet lit up. 4 minutes of raw fury spilled from the set of Terminator Salvation, turning a blockbuster shoot into global gossip overnight. It started when cinematographer Shane Hurlbut accidentally crossed Bale's eyeline during an intense scene. What followed was a tirade that stunned even hardened crew. Bale's voice rose to a terrifying pitch as he screamed profanities, threatened to quit, and demanded Hurlbut be fired on the spot. Witnesses later said the entire set froze, no one daring to breathe as the star unleashed line after line of abuse. The recording captured more than 40 expletives. "I'll kick your ass," Bale shouted, pacing as crew tried to calm him. At one point, he threatened to trash the lights himself if the mistake happened again. Director McGee attempted to intervene, but Bale kept going, his fury spiraling for minutes with no pause. When the tape leaked, it went viral. Radio shows played the rant on repeat, remixing it into songs. Hollywood veterans admitted they had never heard anything so intense caught on record. While Bale later apologized publicly, calling it a case of method acting gone too far, crew members from other films stepped forward with similar stories of his temper. On American Psycho in 2000, insiders said he often stayed in character off-camera, and when things didn't go his way, his anger surfaced. During The Machinist in 2004, Crew described tense days when his frustration boiled over, though nothing matched the ferocity of the Terminator explosion. Despite the backlash, studios didn't turn away. Bale's reputation for intensity was already legendary, and directors knew the same drive that caused his meltdowns also fueled award-winning performances. Still, the Terminator rant stuck. Late-night hosts joked about it for months. Fans quoted it as often as they quoted his movies. Lindsay Lohan's set blow-ups. Directors once called her the most promising young actress in Hollywood. By the mid-2000s, that promise came with chaos. Production stalled, crews walked out, and temper-fueled clashes became a headline routine. The 2007 film Georgia Rule turned into a case study. Reports from the set described Lohan skipping call times, showing up late, or not arriving at all. James G. Robinson, head of Morgan Creek Productions, sent her a public letter blasting her behavior as discourteous, irresponsible, and unprofessional. Crew members confirmed that tantrums over script changes and scheduling snarled production, with some refusing to return if the star wasn't reined in. On Herbie, fully loaded in 2005, similar problems surfaced. Staff recalled constant arguments with makeup artists and wardrobe teams, fueled by late nights and exhaustion. Rumors spread that Disney considered replacing her mid-shoot, but the studio pushed through to protect the franchise. The delays still cost millions. Her temper followed her off-set as well. Paparazzi clashes in Los Angeles turned violent when she was accused of chasing photographers in her car. Police later investigated multiple incidents, one involving a high-speed pursuit that ended in her arrest. Court appearances cut into production schedules, frustrating both studios and insurers. By 2010, her career was slipping, but the behavior didn't stop. On The Canyons in 2013, director Paul Schrader admitted production nearly collapsed because of her explosive outbursts. Crew members described her storming out of scenes, screaming over lighting, and refusing to work until her demands were met. At one point, Schrader said he locked himself in his office to avoid a confrontation. Colleagues also reported mood swings that kept everyone guessing. One day she was charming and cooperative, the next she was shouting at assistants or vanishing from set without warning. Insurance companies began demanding extra clauses in contracts to cover delays and legal risks tied to her name. Tabloids captured every meltdown, but the effect on her coworkers was less visible. Crews described long hours wasted waiting for her to calm down or reappear, while fellow actors admitted entire scenes had to be rewritten to work around her absences. Alec Baldwin's endless rage. The voicemail leaked in 2007, and the world heard a father's fury. In the recording, Baldwin called his 11-year-old daughter a rude, thoughtless little pig during a custody fight with ex-wife Kim Basinger. Public reaction was immediate. The message went viral, casting Baldwin's temper into a spotlight that would only grow brighter in the years ahead. By 2011, his anger exploded again, this time on an airplane. Baldwin refused to turn off his phone before takeoff, reportedly slamming a bathroom door so hard the pilots heard it in the cockpit. Flight attendants said he shouted insults at them until security removed him from the flight. American Airlines banned him temporarily, a rare move for a celebrity of his stature. Photographers often felt the brunt of his rage. In 2013, Baldwin was accused of using homophobic slurs while shoving a paparazzo in New York. The incident triggered protests and cost him his MSNBC talk show, which was canceled after only 5 episodes. In another clash, he was filmed grabbing a photographer by the arm, yelling until police separated the two. The temper extended to everyday disputes. In 2018, Baldwin was arrested after punching a man during a fight over a parking space in Manhattan. Police charged him with assault and harassment. Witnesses said the argument escalated in seconds, with Baldwin lunging before officers intervened. Though he later pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, The mugshot splashed across tabloids reminded the public of his volatile streak. Baldwin himself has admitted the problem. In interviews, he described his temper as a serious flaw and claimed he sought help. But apologies often came after new incidents, reinforcing the image of a man who couldn't control his anger for long. Even in professional spaces, the stories piled up. On 30 Rock, crew whispered about explosive outbursts between takes. Writers hinted that producers sometimes had to calm him before scenes. Yet the Emmy wins kept coming, and studios continued to hire him, balancing risk against the undeniable power of his performances. The pattern was clear. They made us laugh, they made us cry, they made us believe in their on-screen personas. But when the cameras stopped rolling, their true nature came out, and it's nothing like what you expected. The Family Man's Dark Side. For years, Bill Cosby was America's favorite TV dad. On The Cosby Show, he played the perfect father, funny, wise, and full of life lessons. Off-screen, he gave speeches about family values and personal responsibility. But behind the friendly image, there was a much darker truth. For decades, rumors followed him, but few questioned his reputation. That changed in 2014 when comedian Hannibal Buress called him out during a stand-up show. The clip went viral, and suddenly, the world started listening. One by one, women came forward, sharing nearly identical stories. More than 60 women accused Cosby of drugging and assaulting them. Many had been too scared to speak out earlier. He was rich, powerful, and had a spotless public image, but the details were disturbing. Aspiring actresses, models, and even colleagues said he lured them in with promises of mentorship, only to betray them. In 2015, Cosby was arrested for assaulting Andrea Constand, a former Temple University employee. The case went to trial, and in 2018, he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, becoming the first major celebrity of the Me Too era to be convicted. But in 2021, his conviction was overturned due to a legal technicality. A past deal with a prosecutor should have prevented the trial from happening. Just like that, Cosby walked free. Even though he was legally released, his career was finished. TV networks pulled The Cosby Show, schools took back honorary degrees, and fans turned away. The man who once lectured others about morality had been exposed as a predator. He still denies the accusations, but his reputation is beyond repair. The talk show tyrant. For years, Ellen DeGeneres was the face of kindness. Her talk show made millions smile with heartwarming surprises, funny celebrity interviews, and feel-good moments. She ended every episode with the words, "Be kind to one another." But behind the scenes, former staff said kindness was the last thing they experienced. In 2020, reports surfaced that working on The Ellen DeGeneres Show was a nightmare. Employees described a toxic workplace filled with fear, intimidation, and unfair treatment. Some were fired after taking medical leave or attending family funerals. Others were told not to look Ellen in the eye. There were even accusations of harassment by top producers, which led to multiple firings. At first, Ellen brushed off the backlash, claiming she had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. But more and more people spoke out. Former guests revealed cold, awkward interactions that clashed with Ellen's on-screen warmth. Celebrities like Dakota Johnson, Mariah Carey, and Brad Garrett hinted that Ellen's friendly TV persona was just an act. The damage was done. Ratings dropped fast, and advertisers started pulling away. In 2021, Ellen announced that her show would end after 19 seasons. She called it a personal decision, but many saw it as a direct result of the backlash. The comedian who was cruel. Chevy Chase was one of the biggest comedy stars of the 1970s and 80s. As an original Saturday Night Live cast member, he helped shape modern sketch comedy. His success led to major film roles in Caddyshack, National Lampoon's Vacation, and Fletch. On screen, he played lovable, sarcastic wisecrackers. Off-screen? A different story. From the start of his career, Chase gained a reputation for being difficult. He left SNL after just one season, later returning to host and immediately clashing with the new cast. He insulted everyone, including then-rising star Bill Murray. Their feud got so bad that it turned into a physical fight backstage right before a live episode. His arrogance and mean-spirited humor weren't just aimed at co-stars. Writers, directors, and crew members often found him unbearable. Many claimed he was cruel for no reason, making racist, sexist, and demeaning jokes at others' expense. Will Ferrell once called him the worst SNL host he'd ever worked with. Chase's behavior followed him to film sets. During National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, his co-star Beverly D'Angelo said the entire cast had to adjust to his moods, never knowing if he'd be friendly or hostile that day. On the show Community, his treatment of colleagues reached a breaking point. He frequently insulted cast and crew, directing discriminatory comments toward Donald Glover. Show creator Dan Harmon openly criticized him, and Chase eventually left before the final season. Despite his legacy in comedy, Chase's reputation damaged his career. Once a top box office draw, he became increasingly difficult to work with. By the 2000s, leading roles dried up, and he was mostly remembered for his past work and his bad attitude. In interviews, Chase has admitted to being difficult, but often brushes it off as part of his personality. While some still see him as a comedy icon, others view him as an example of how ego and cruelty can overshadow talent. The philanthropist who lied. Jared Leto built a career on transformation. He's an Oscar-winning actor, a rock star with 30 Seconds to Mars, and a self-proclaimed deep thinker. His fans admire his dedication to roles, extreme method acting, and supposed generosity. But behind the carefully crafted image, Leto has faced serious allegations, ranging from cult-like behavior to inappropriate relationships with young fans. For years, stories circulated about his treatment of followers. His band, 30 Seconds to Mars, developed an intense fan base with Leto at the center. He launched a so-called exclusive retreat called Camp Mars, where fans paid thousands to attend. The event was marketed as a bonding experience, but many saw it as a money grab. Photos surfaced of Leto in white robes, surrounded by adoring fans, fueling comparisons to a cult. Then came the more troubling accusations. Multiple sources, including music journalists and social media users, have claimed Leto pursued teenage fans. Reports date back to the early 2000s, when he allegedly used his fame to lure underage girls into uncomfortable situations. A former music industry insider once said Leto had a reputation for targeting girls as young as 16. Though no formal charges have been filed, the whispers never stopped. Leto's behavior on film sets hasn't helped his case. He's known for extreme method acting, but some call it outright harassment. On the set of Suicide Squad, where he played the Joker, he allegedly sent disturbing gifts to co-stars, including used condoms and dead animals. Many dismissed it as a publicity stunt, but others saw it as unprofessional and unsettling. Despite the controversy, Hollywood continues to embrace him. He's still landing major roles and fronting luxury ad campaigns. When asked about the allegations, Leto stays silent or deflects. His fan base remains loyal, and his reputation, while damaged, hasn't fully crumbled. The romantic lead's abuse. Johnny Depp was once one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. With his roles in Edward Scissorhands, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he built a reputation as the eccentric yet charming leading man. Fans saw him as misunderstood, artistic, and deeply romantic, but his off-screen relationships told a different story. In 2016, his ex-wife, actress Amber Heard, filed for divorce and accused him of domestic violence. She provided photos of bruises and claimed he had a history of alcohol-fueled rage. Depp denied everything, calling her a liar and an abuser herself. What followed was one of the most public and bitter celebrity legal battles in history. Heard wrote a 2018 op-ed describing herself as a survivor of domestic abuse without naming Depp. He responded by suing her for defamation, claiming she ruined his career. During the trial, shocking details emerged: drug binges, explosive fights, and violent texts where Depp described wanting to harm Heard. However, recordings also revealed Heard admitting to hitting Depp. The case divided the public. Some believed Heard, pointing to photos, testimonies, and court filings. Others sided with Depp, arguing Heard manipulated him and the media. In 2020, Depp lost a lawsuit against a British newspaper that called him a wife-beater, with the judge ruling the allegations were substantially true. Then came the 2022 U.S. trial, broadcast live to millions. This time, Depp won, with the jury ruling that Heard had defamed him, but the trial was less about proving innocence and more about public perception. Depp's fan base rallied behind him, while Heard's reputation collapsed. Despite the legal win, Depp's career took a hit. He lost his Pirates of the Caribbean role and struggled to rebuild his image. While some studios distanced themselves, others welcomed him back, including European filmmakers. The action star's fury. Steven Seagal built his career playing tough, unstoppable heroes. In the 80s and 90s, he was one of Hollywood's biggest action stars, leading films like Under Siege and Above the Law. On screen, he took down villains with ease. Off-screen, though, he had a reputation for being difficult, aggressive, and even dangerous. From the start, Seagal's behavior raised eyebrows. He often bragged about his martial arts skills, but many questioned his legitimacy. Co-stars and stunt performers accused him of intentionally hitting them during fight scenes, refusing to pull punches. Actor John Leguizamo recalled Seagal slamming him against a wall for laughing at him on set. His temper wasn't limited to film sets. Over the years, multiple women, including actresses and assistants, accused Seagal of misconduct. Some claimed he made inappropriate advances during auditions, often under the guise of private casting sessions. In 2018, 2 women accused him of assault, including one who said he attacked her when she was just 17. Seagal denied all allegations. His reputation for arrogance and hostility extended beyond Hollywood. Seagal frequently reinvented himself, at one point claiming he worked for the CIA. Later, he cozied up to world leaders, including Vladimir Putin, who granted him Russian citizenship. His growing political ties and controversial statements made him even more polarizing. By the early 2000s, Seagal's Hollywood career was fading. Directors avoided working with him due to his behavior, and he was relegated to low-budget, direct-to-video action films. Even then, reports of mistreatment and erratic behavior continued. Today, Seagal is more known for controversy than for movies. He still insists he's a martial arts master, a law enforcement expert, and a geopolitical strategist. But few take him seriously. Once a major star, his reputation for rage, dishonesty, and misconduct left his career in ruins. The singer who silenced victims. R. Kelly was a music icon. With hits like I Believe I Can Fly and Ignition, Remix, he dominated the R&B charts for decades. Fans saw him as a musical genius, a man who could turn emotions into timeless songs. But behind the fame, troubling accusations followed him for years, ones that were ignored or brushed aside until the truth became too big to hide. Whispers about Kelly's behavior started early in his career. In 1994, at 27, he secretly married 15-year-old Aaliyah using false documents. The marriage was annulled, but it raised serious questions. Then came the early 2000s when disturbing footage surfaced, allegedly showing Kelly involved in misconduct with a minor. He was charged, but avoided conviction in 2008 after the key witness refused to testify. Despite ongoing concerns, Kelly's career thrived. He continued performing to sold-out crowds, winning awards, and working with major artists. Many in the industry turned a blind eye, and those who spoke out were dismissed. For years, he used his wealth and influence to keep accusations quiet. Then, in 2019, Surviving R. Kelly aired. The documentary featured first-hand accounts from multiple women who described years of manipulation and control. The stories painted a disturbing pattern. Kelly allegedly isolated young women, cut them off from their families, and maintained an environment where he controlled every aspect of their lives. The backlash was immediate. His record label dropped him, streaming services pulled his music, and his career collapsed overnight. That same year, Kelly was arrested and charged with serious crimes, including exploitation, coercion, and racketeering. In 2021, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. More convictions followed, sealing his fate. The activist's hidden hypocrisy. Sean Penn built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most intense actors. With 2 Academy Awards and standout performances in Mystic River and Milk, he was celebrated for his raw, emotional performances. Off-screen, he positioned himself as a champion of justice, advocating for disaster relief, human rights, and political reform. But while he spoke passionately about these causes, his personal history painted a far more complicated picture. Penn's reputation for fiery behavior dates back to the 1980s, during his marriage to Madonna. Their relationship was highly publicized, but behind the scenes, it was anything but picture perfect. In 1988, Madonna reportedly sought police assistance after an alleged violent incident. Though she later downplayed parts of the story, reports of Penn's temper followed him for years. His outbursts weren't limited to his personal life. Throughout his career, Penn frequently made headlines for aggressive run-ins with the media. He was known for clashing with paparazzi, sometimes physically, and even served time in 1987 for an altercation with a photographer. In another instance, he was caught on camera aggressively confronting a reporter, showing the same volatility he often criticized in others. Despite his activism, Penn's actions often contradicted his public stance. He supported humanitarian causes but had a history of heated confrontations with colleagues and journalists. His interviews were filled with harsh criticisms of Hollywood, politics, and even his peers, often sounding less like a voice for justice and more like someone settling personal scores. In later years, Penn's unpredictable behavior made him a controversial figure. While some admired his work in disaster relief, others questioned his motivations, seeing him as someone who inserted himself into global crises for attention. His political views also sparked backlash, with some calling him hypocritical for supporting leaders with questionable records. The fan favorites' manipulation. James Corden built a career on charm. As the host of The Late Late Show, he became a fan favorite with viral segments like Carpool Karaoke and Spill Your Guts or Fill Your Guts. His cheerful personality and self-deprecating humor made him seem relatable, an everyman who just happened to be famous. But behind the smiles and sing-alongs, former colleagues, restaurant staff, and even fans told a very different story. Rumors of Corden's behavior started surfacing years ago, mostly from people who worked behind the scenes. Writers from The Late Late Show claimed he was dismissive and belittling, taking credit for their work and creating a stressful environment. Despite his fun-loving on-screen presence, many described him as cold and uninterested when the cameras weren't rolling. The biggest hit to his reputation came in 2022 when a New York restaurant owner called him out for his treatment of staff. Corden was accused of being rude to servers, yelling over minor mistakes, and even demanding free drinks as compensation for small inconveniences. The backlash was immediate, forcing him to apologize publicly. But for many, the damage was done, especially as more people came forward with similar stories. Co-stars and industry insiders also had their share of complaints. Actor Patrick Stewart famously called Corden out during an awards event, implying he was arrogant and difficult to work with. Others claimed he often ignored fans in public unless cameras were around. making his friendly persona seem more like an act than reality. In 2023, Corden stepped away from The Late Late Show, insisting it was his decision to spend more time with family. But with his reputation taking multiple hits, some believed he saw the writing on the wall. The awards, Darling's secret life. Kevin Spacey was once one of Hollywood's most respected actors. With 2 Academy Awards for The Usual Suspects and American Beauty, plus a starring role in House of Cards, he was seen as a powerhouse of talent. His performances were intense, calculated, and unforgettable. But behind the prestige, a darker reality existed, one that would eventually destroy his career. In 2017, at the height of the Me Too movement, actor Anthony Rapp accused Spacey of inappropriate behavior when Rapp was just 14. Spacey responded with a public apology but attempted to shift the focus by making a statement about his personal life. The damage was immediate. His response was widely criticized as deflecting from the real issue. After Rapp's accusations, more people spoke out. Multiple individuals, including crew members from House of Cards, accused Spacey of misconduct and abuse of power. The accusations painted him as someone who used his influence to intimidate and manipulate others. The fallout was swift. Netflix dropped him from House of Cards, removing his character from the final season. Studios distanced themselves, and Spacey's planned projects were either shelved or recast. Ridley Scott even replaced him in All the Money in the World, reshooting Spacey's scenes with Christopher Plummer just weeks before the film's release. Spacey faced multiple legal battles in the years that followed. While he won some cases, including a 2022 civil trial against Rapp, other accusations led to criminal investigations. Though some charges were dropped, his once thriving career was over. By 2023, Spacey was attempting a slow return, claiming he had been unfairly canceled. But Hollywood hasn't welcomed him back. The actor who once held the industry in his grip is now largely forgotten, his talent overshadowed by the scandals that tore his career apart.
She was the scream queen, the beautiful ghoul who kept horror fans at the edge of their seats for decades. This gorgeous and voluptuous lady knew just how to keep her fans coming back for more, and as a result of this, she made a name for herself as one of the most celebrated actresses in British horror cinema. But beyond the accomplishments and behind the scenes was a woman the world barely knew. From her dislike for watching horror films to her horrific real-life experiences, Ingrid Pitt's story will leave you wondering if you really knew her. Surviving the Nazis. Ingrid spent the most part of her life bringing horror stories to life, but what a lot of people don't know is that this actress was most likely good at depicting horror because she went through horrific experiences as a child. In a 2006 interview, she told with the New Zealand Herald this, "I think it's very amazing that I do horror films when I had this awful childhood, but maybe that's why I'm good at it." It all started on the 21st of November 1937 in Poland, where Ingrid was born in the midst of chaos. Over the years, there have been speculations that her real name was Ingushka Petrov, a name she later changed for personal reasons. Her father, who was German, and her mother, who was a Polish Jew, were both set to raise their children when life took an unexpected and horrific turn. A few years after Ingrid was born, tragedy struck. The Nazis picked up her family, and before she knew what was happening, Ingrid was separated from her father and her older sister. She had no idea where her father and sister were taken to, but was taken to the Stutthof concentration camp with her mother, where she came face to face with a real-life horror experience. Ingrid was just 5 years old at the time. One can only how traumatic this experience was. She saw little girls being maltreated and sexually assaulted. Ingrid also witnessed the death of her own mother's best friend. All these horrific things were happening right in front of her, but all she could do was to hope and pray that fate had a better plan and that sometime in the near future all these would come to an end. Sadly, the torture didn't end as soon as she hoped. Her and her mother were held there for the next 3 years with no hopes of returning to their normal lives. However, it was in the midst of this dark reality that she began to dream of a better life. She would often lay in the straw, imagining what her life would look like if she was someone else. There was something inside of her that made her believe that she was going to experience life through a different lens. Perhaps a life that was not marked by the confines and terrors of a concentration camp. From dream to reality. After 3 long and hard years, Ingrid and her mother left the camp after the war and began searching for her father and sister. Unfortunately, their hopes of reuniting the family dashed when her father was found. He had become a shadow of himself, and he passed away shortly after. During that period, Ingrid started nursing dreams of becoming an actress, and she decided to pursue this passion fiercely. She was said to have gotten involved in theater productions before she started her screen career. She became a well-known actress on the East Berlin stage, and the time she spent performing in theater enabled her to hone her skills before she started appearing in films. She spent the most part of the mid-1960s appearing in Spanish films. However, her roles were mostly uncredited. Interestingly, Ingrid could not speak Spanish at the time, but still found a way to immerse herself in the industry with the hopes of going international one day. Thankfully, her efforts paid off, and things started looking up for her when she landed a supporting role in the 1968 film Where Eagles Dare. In this film, she portrayed the role of Agent Heidi, and she appeared alongside Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. This was the role that led to her being noticed by the executives of Hammer Film Productions. They knew that her Eastern European and glamorous looks combined with her talent was a recipe for success. Shortly after, she was given the role of vampiress Mircalla and was the beginning of a notable career in the horror genre, becoming the Queen of Horror. Ingrid's journey into the world of horror began in the late 1960s and early 1970s, an era marked by the resurgence of Gothic horror films. With her striking beauty, commanding screen presence, and a voice that could send shivers down your spine, Ingrid quickly became a sensation in the genre. It all started with her breakout role in The Vampire Lovers in 1970, a film that not only showcased her acting prowess but also solidified her status as a horror icon. As the enigmatic bloodsucker, Ingrid brought a seductive allure to the screen, redefining the image of female vampires in the process. But it wasn't just about the fangs and the supernatural. Ingrid Pitt had a way of infusing her characters with depth and complexity. In Countess Dracula 1971, she portrayed the notorious Countess Elizabeth Bathory, blending horror with historical drama. The film wasn't just a showcase of her ability to instill fear, it was a masterclass in the art of combining terror with a touch of tragic humanity. Ingrid's reign as the Queen of Horror continued with films like The House That Dripped Blood, still in 1971, and The Wicker Man, 1973, where her performances left an indelible mark on the minds of horror enthusiasts. It wasn't just about the scares, it was about the intensity she brought to every role, making her characters memorable and iconic in the annals of horror history. Off-screen, Ingrid Pitt became a beloved figure at horror conventions and fan events. Her genuine love for the genre and her fans endeared her to a loyal following. It wasn't just about the roles she played, it was about the connection she forged with those who reveled in the thrill of a good horror tale. As the Queen of Horror, Ingrid Pitt's legacy lives on. Her impact on the genre transcends the screen, echoing through the corridors of cinematic history. In the darkened theaters of the past and the living rooms of devoted fans, Ingrid's presence endures, a testament to the enduring allure of horror and the woman who reigned as its beloved queen. She authored several books. Beyond the eerie glow of the silver screen, Ingrid Pitt ventured into the world of words, leaving her mark as not just the Queen of Horror on film, but also as a talented author. The same voice that sent shivers down spines now weaving tales on the pages of books. Ingrid's literary journey took flight with a series of books that reflected her deep passion for storytelling. Among her notable works is Life's a Scream, 1986, a memoir that peeled back the curtain on her life, offering readers a glimpse into the highs, lows, and thrills of her journey in the film industry. It wasn't just a recounting of her experiences, it was a narrative that mirrored the spirited, fearless woman behind the character she portrayed. In addition to her memoir, Ingrid explored the realms of fiction. Cuckoo Run in 1985 and The Bedside Companion for Vampire Lovers 1973, co-authored with David J. Skal, showcased her versatility as a storyteller. The former, a suspenseful novel, demonstrated her ability to craft narratives that extended beyond the horror genre, while the latter delved into the lore and allure of vampires, a subject close to her heart. Ingrid Pitt wasn't content with merely entertaining. She aimed to share her love for the macabre and mysterious. Her books became a bridge between her and her fans, allowing them to delve deeper into the mind of the woman who had become an icon of horror. As an author, Ingrid's voice resonated with the same charisma that made her a beloved figure on screen. Her words painted vivid landscapes of terror, romance, and suspense, inviting readers to step into the realms she conjured with her pen.
She wasn't the biggest name in Hollywood. In fact, she almost turned down the role. The film itself was a low-budget project nobody expected to succeed. But then came that one scene that changed everything. How did a woman, who wasn't Columbia Pictures' first choice, outshine Hollywood's top leading men? What led her to this moment, and why is it still considered one of the most iconic performances in film history? The Unlikely Star. In the early 1930s, if you asked Hollywood about its top female stars, you'd hear names like Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, and Norma Shearer. These women represented the peak of MGM glamour. But Claudette Colbert? Well, let's just say she was respected in her own right, but she was far from dominating the conversation. Not yet, anyway. Claudette's story is not like most Hollywood tales. She didn't have a tough start, and she didn't fight for small, ungrateful roles. Emilie Claudette Chauchuan, as she was once called, was born in France in 1903. As a child, she moved to New York and grew up in a comfortable middle-class home. Needless to say, she had all she needed and wasn't exactly from a poor household. So how did acting come in? Well, Claudette didn't plan this. From the start, she really wanted to be a painter. The stage, let alone the silver screen, wasn't something she dreamed of conquering. But as you'd suspect, in time, everything changed. Just like a lot of other Hollywood background stories, Claudette suddenly found herself drawn to acting, almost by accident. But one thing was for sure, she wanted to do this for the rest of her life. So she went on to study at the Art Students League of New York before taking acting classes. Now it wasn't like she saw herself as the next big thing or the greatest performer. She simply delved into acting at this time because it seemed interesting and intriguing. At this time, she began to eye Broadway as a goal and not necessarily the golden streets of Hollywood. To her, she wanted to be a stage performer and nothing else. However, fate had other plans. In the late 1920s, there was a massive shift in the film industry. The audiences were tired of the regular actors they were exposed to, and they wanted more. So producers and studios were desperate for fresh actors with stage performance experience. And just like that, preparation meets opportunity. And Colbert, with her refined diction and expressive delivery, fit the bill. She signed a contract with Paramount in 1928, but even then, film was nothing more than a paycheck, a way to supplement her theater work. Hollywood, to her, was a temporary stop, not the destination. She may not have been in love with Hollywood, but Hollywood was certainly in love with her. So despite her reluctance, she found steady work in the film industry. By the early 1930s, she was well regarded, a familiar face on the screen, but not quite a marquee name. Paramount slotted her into a particular type, elegant, poised, sophisticated, and so every role she was cast for was as socialites, aristocrats, and the occasional femme fatale, but rarely as the leading lady in a high-profile project. Comedy, for instance, wasn't what she was known for. The studio saw her as refined, intelligent, and dramatic. At the time, Hollywood's rigid studio system dictated who became a star and who remained just another working actor. The biggest names were tied to powerhouse studios like MGM, Warner Bros., and Paramount, and each had their own roster of carefully groomed stars. MGM was the pinnacle, home to the biggest female icons, while Warner Bros. Was grittier and more fast-talking. Paramount, where Colbert was signed, had a reputation for sophistication but wasn't pushing her as one of their elite leading ladies. She was respected, employed, and successful, but she wasn't a sensation. But if you're wondering how she eventually became a sensation, it was in the most unlikely circumstances ever. It wouldn't come through a role carefully crafted for her, nor would it be in the kind of high-profile drama that studios built around their biggest stars. Instead, it would come in a film that no one wanted, with a part she nearly turned down. The film no one wanted. Now, to understand the origins of this film, you must get the power play in Hollywood at the time. You see, back then, Hollywood was a well-oiled machine, churning out films at an industrial pace, with the biggest studios, MGM, Warner Bros., and Paramount, holding all the power. On the other hand, Columbia Pictures was not exactly part of that elite club. It was a smaller studio and often dismissed as a poverty row operation. They churned out low-budget films that rarely made a lasting impact. Then this small low-budget studio wanted to put out yet another movie called It Happened One Night. Clearly, no one was expecting anything much from it. It wasn't supposed to be special or break any milestones. It had no A-list actors, and even the director Frank Capra was just trying to make a name for himself at the time. The script, based on a short story called Night Bus, had been floating around Hollywood, failing to generate much enthusiasm. It was supposed to be a simple, light-hearted road trip romance, hardly the kind of film that studios considered important. No one wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. The role of Ellie Andrews, the spoiled heiress on the run, had been offered to several leading ladies, but none of them wanted it. Myrna Loy, known for her wit and elegance, turned it down, calling it beneath her. Constance Bennett, another major star, rejected it as well. Even Bette Davis had no interest. No one saw it as a prestigious project, and with Columbia's reputation for lower-budget productions, it wasn't exactly the kind of film actresses were scrambling to be in. And then the role was offered to our very own Claudette Colbert. And well, she too wasn't interested either. She had just finished a grueling shoot and was eager to take a vacation. When the role was offered to her, she dismissed it outright, reportedly saying the script was silly. Columbia wasn't her studio, and she had no desire to take on what seemed like a second-rate project. But Capra, the director, went on to convince her she was the perfect choice. He would not take no for an answer. He kept pushing and being consistent. Finally, Colbert caved, but she made a deal. She would do the film, but only if she was paid double her usual salary and if production wrapped within 4 weeks. She wanted to be out as quickly as possible, back to her planned trip, and she wasn't really expecting the studio to agree, but they did, and just like that, she was locked in. Little did she know that this so-called minor project would change the course of her career forever. The scene that changed everything. During the filming of It Happened One Night, things were rushed and low budget. Overall, it wasn't an entirely spectacular production, but one scene in particular stood out and became one of the greatest scenes in the history of Hollywood, the hitchhiking scene. Interestingly enough, it was a deceptively simple setup. Ellie Andrews and Peter Warne were two unlikely traveling companions and are stranded on the side of the road, desperate to catch a ride. Peter, ever the cocky know-it-all, insists there's a proper technique to hitchhiking. He demonstrates with a series of exaggerated gestures, each one failing more embarrassingly than the last. Meanwhile, Ellie, watching with amused skepticism, finally steps in and she does the most unbelievable thing. Without a word, she lifts her skirt just enough to reveal her bare leg, And just like that, within seconds, a car screeches to a halt. What makes the scene work so well isn't just the humor and the obvious sexiness. It's also the relationship between Colbert and Gable. She isn't only playing the beautiful, flirtatious woman using her looks to get what she wants. She's also effortlessly in control, turning the moment into a masterclass in comedic timing. Her expression, half smug, half innocent, tells us everything. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she's enjoying watching Peter squirm. It's one of those rare moments in romantic comedies where the woman isn't just reacting to the man's antics, she's outsmarting him. What makes it even more fascinating is the tension behind the scenes. Most people find it hard to believe that Colbert was reportedly reluctant to do the leg-bearing moment at all. She considered it too risque and initially refused, forcing Capra to scramble for a solution. The director even hired a body double to perform the scene, but when Colbert saw the stand-in's legs, she scoffed, declaring that hers looked better. In the end, she did it herself, but that initial hesitation worked in her favor. The scene doesn't come across as forced or overly suggestive. Instead, it feels natural, playful, and perfectly in line with her character's blend of sophistication and rebellion. And then there was Gable, playing the perfect straight man. He doesn't overreact or turn the moment into slapstick. Instead, his subtle frustration, his slightly wounded ego, and his wordless resignation make Colbert's performance shine even more. The balance between them, her effortless charm and his exasperated masculinity, made the scene and the film an instant classic. The glorious aftermath. When the film finally hit theaters, critics and audiences were taken aback by the unexpected star power that emerged from what they assumed would be a standard romantic comedy. Clark Gable's rugged charm had long been the draw, but it was Colbert's subtle humor and magnetic presence that quietly upstaged him, transforming her performance into the film's most talked-about moment. But even the viewers had a nice experience with the movie. They found themselves laughing at the antics on screen and at the delightful twist of fate that saw this refined actress become the unexpected heroine of the story. And just like that, glowing reviews began pouring in from every corner. Newspapers, magazines, and even casual chatter among moviegoers praised her as the revelation of the year. It was as if she had cast an enchanting spell over the audience, eclipsing the male lead with her wit, poise, and that irresistible charm that made every gesture memorable. In one sweeping stroke, she challenged the very concept of stardom, prompting even the most skeptical critics to reconsider the established order of Hollywood's leading ladies. As is Hollywood's nature, with a great performance comes great accolades and recognition. The film's triumph at the Academy Awards only solidified this newfound status. As It Happened One Night swept the major categories, Colbert's performance became emblematic of a shifting tide in the industry, a movement where talent and authenticity began to outweigh the traditional markers of star power. This moment of recognition was not just an accolade, it was a turning point that elevated her career to heights previously reserved for the era's most celebrated names. Suddenly, she was no longer seen as merely a supporting presence in a male-dominated landscape, but as a central figure whose work resonated on every level. This surge in recognition ushered Claudette Colbert into the elite circles of Hollywood. Roles that once seemed out of reach became part of her repertoire, and the kinds of characters she portrayed grew richer, more nuanced, and decidedly more challenging. No longer was she the dependable, refined actress of the past. She was now a trailblazer, paving the way for a new kind of leading woman who could balance humor with sophistication and vulnerability with strength. As the echoes of that transformative performance continued to reshape her career, one couldn't help but wonder what daring choices and fresh narratives awaited her next in the ever-evolving world of cinema. More than just a scene. Claudette Colbert's performance in It Happened One Night did more than just change her career. It changed the way Hollywood thought about leading ladies in romantic comedies. Let's break that down. Before this, female characters in the genre often fit into rigid categories. It was either the demure love interest, the glamorous but distant socialite, or the ditzy comedic sidekick. But after the film, It Happened One Night, Colbert completely shattered those expectations by embodying something a little more different, a woman who was witty, elegant, playful, and undeniably in control of her own story. When she portrayed Ellie Andrews, she set a new standard. A standard that said she wasn't there to just react and compliment the male lead like every other film before that time, but she was an equal force in the movie, someone to be taken equally seriously and capable of bringing her own energy. She was very sophisticated, but wasn't also above getting her hands dirty, whether it was dunking a donut with exaggerated precision, delivering sharp comebacks, or cheekily outsmarting Peter at his own game. She was confident yet vulnerable, independent yet romantic, and, most importantly, always interesting to watch. This balance, mixed charm with intelligence, sensuality with humor, became the blueprint for romantic comedy heroines for decades to come. You can see shades of Colbert's Ellie in actresses like Katharine Hepburn, Rosalind Russell, and even later stars like Julia Roberts or Meg Ryan. The idea of the cool, confident, and clever leading lady owes much to what Colbert perfected in that single performance. Despite her many other achievements in Hollywood, her work in Midnight, The Palm Beach Story, and Since You Went Away, nothing quite eclipsed what she did in It Happened One Night. It remains the moment that defines her legacy, the film that turned her from a respected actress into a cinematic icon. Even as Hollywood evolved and new stars emerged, her impact on the romantic comedy genre never faded. Decades later, when audiences look back at the golden age of Hollywood, Colbert's hitchhiking scene, her sharp banter with Gable, and her effortless blend of humor and sophistication still stand as some of the most memorable moments in film history. And in that way, It Happened One Night wasn't just her breakthrough, it was her immortality. What came next? With It Happened One Night turning Claudette Colbert into one of Hollywood's most bankable stars overnight, she suddenly had something that she never had before: power. All of a sudden, she was no longer just a respected actress. She was now a full-fledged leading lady with the ability to choose her roles more carefully and negotiate better deals. And unlike many stars who get typecast after a breakout performance, Colbert refused to be boxed in. After her performance, you'd think she will now solely stick to comedy romance movies, but that was the definition of typecasting, and she wanted no part in that. So rather than simply coasting on the success of screwball comedy, she used her newfound status to explore a range of genres. Admittedly, she did continue making romantic comedies, many of which became classics. She also took on dramatic roles, period pieces, and even wartime films. Her next few years were a masterclass in versatility, proving that her charm and talent could extend far beyond fast-talking heiresses and road trip romance. After a successful movie, there is usually a special bond between the actors and the directors, and this one was no different. She quickly reunited with director Frank Capra in Broadway Bill in 1934, a comedy drama about horse racing, which wasn't as big as It Happened One Night, but reaffirmed her place in the industry. And then came The Gilded Lily in 1935. With that, she cast away all doubts that she was the rom-com queen. Soon enough, audiences eagerly embraced her sophisticated yet playful approach to love stories. For any other actress, this would be enough. She had done her best, and it would be time to stay where she was. But not this time. She wasn't content to just stay in just one lane. So in 1934, she stepped into the shoes of the Egyptian queen in Cleopatra, and with that, she proved to everyone that she could carry an epic historical drama as convincingly as a light-hearted comedy, and make no mistake, this was no easy feat. While the film may not be as widely remembered today as later versions of Cleopatra, it was a major success at the time and showcased her ability to transform into larger-than-life roles. Throughout the late 1930s and 1940s, Colbert continued to balance glamour with depth, starring in films like Midnight in 1939, an underrated romantic comedy that remains a fan favorite, and The Palm Beach Story in 1942, a screwball masterpiece that solidified her reputation as one of the genre's greatest leading ladies. But she didn't shy away from serious work either. Her performance in Since You Went Away in 1944 was a movie about a World War II drama, and it earned her an Oscar nomination and showed audiences a more vulnerable emotional side to her acting. Unlike some of her contemporaries, Colbert managed to maintain her star status for years, carefully selecting roles that played to her strengths while also allowing for evolution. She didn't fade away or burn out. Instead, she adapted. By the time Hollywood's golden age began to shift in the 1950s, Colbert had already built a body of work that ensured her place among the greats. And yet, despite all her success, nothing ever quite matched the cultural impact of It Happened One Night. It remained the defining moment of her career, the performance that secured her a place in film history. But instead of being limited by it, she used it as a launching pad, proving time and again that she was more than just a one-hit wonder. Away from the cameras. When it comes to Claudette Colbert's love life and personal relationships, they were anything but simple. In 1928, she married actor and director Norman Foster, her co-star in the Broadway play The Barker. But their marriage was kept secret for years, and they didn't even live together. Instead, in Los Angeles, Colbert shared a home with her mother, Jean, who reportedly couldn't stand Foster and wouldn't even let him in the house. Unsurprisingly, the marriage didn't last. They divorced in Mexico in 1935. But that was not the end of love for Colbert. Later that same year, on Christmas Eve, Colbert fell in love again and married Dr. Joel Pressman in Yuma, Arizona. He was a respected surgeon who would go on to become a professor and the head of UCLA Medical School's head and neck surgery department. There was no doubt that Colbert clearly adored him and would do anything for him. She even gave him a Beechcraft airplane as a gift. The two went on to settle into a comfortable life together, buying a ranch in Northern California where Colbert spent her time horseback riding, while Pressman raised show cattle. She had a taste for nice things, driving around in a Lincoln Continental and a Ford Thunderbird. For the first time in a long time, Colbert was happy, and unlike her first marriage, this one lasted for a while, 33 years to be exact. But sadly, her fairy tale came to an end when Pressman passed away from liver cancer in 1968. Now, all she had was her mother, and that relationship wasn't even so great. You see, her mother, Jean, was complicated. Jean was known to be difficult, reportedly favoring Colbert's brother, Charles, over her. Charles, who went by the surname Wendling, taken from their grandmother. He acted as Colbert's business manager for a time and was responsible for negotiating some of her best Hollywood contracts in the late 1930s and early 1940s. In 1942, he enlisted in World War II. In the mid-1950s, Colbert finally decided to take a step away from Hollywood, yet she maintained an extravagant lifestyle. She had a weekend house in Palm Springs, and according to an advertising executive, he had this to say: "Claudette was extravagant. I never, ever saw her question the price of anything." She owned a stunning Lloyd Wright-designed home in Holmby Hills, but later sold it in 1963. She and Pressman then rented a smaller house in Beverly Hills. But after Pressman's demise, she thought it was the end for her, until in 1958 she met Verna Hull, a wealthy painter and photographer who happened to be the stepdaughter of a Sears Roebuck heiress. The two were close friends for nearly a decade, traveling together, sharing an interest in art, and even renting matching penthouses in New York. When Colbert bought a home in Barbados in the early 1960s, Hull bought the house next door. Naturally, rumors swirled about their relationship, but Colbert denied anything romantic. Their friendship eventually fell apart after a dramatic argument while Pressman was dying. Hull reportedly claimed that he would rather take Colbert's life and his own, then pass away alone. That marked the end of their friendship forever, and Colbert ended up living her life away from the spotlight. You know Gene Tierney from Laura and Heaven Can Wait, but you don't know the woman the studios tried to hide. This is the real story, stripped bare. Beauty breaks onto Broadway. Before Hollywood ever lit up her name, Gene Tierney was already turning heads on the East Coast. Born in Brooklyn in 1920, she grew up surrounded by books, manners, and pressure. Her father was a successful insurance broker. Her mother was a gym teacher with sharp posture and high expectations. Jean was raised to be proper, but deep down, she wanted to be seen. At 17, she visited Warner Brothers Studios during a family trip to California. A cameraman caught her profile and said, "You ought to be in pictures." That one offhand comment changed everything. But her father insisted she finish school first. She studied at finishing school in Switzerland, learned French, and returned poised, almost too poised. By the time she debuted at a society ball in 1938, her beauty was talked about in papers. Still, she wasn't content to be a debutante. She wanted the stage. She landed her first Broadway role in What a Life in 1938. The part was small, but critics noticed her presence. The New York Times called her striking, and that was all it took. She quickly booked another role in The Male Animal, where one particular audience member, 20th Century Fox founder Darryl F. Zanuck, took interest. Zanuck offered her a screen test. In the test footage, Jean smiled nervously, but the camera loved her. Her cheekbones, wide eyes, and steady voice didn't need much coaching. She signed a contract with Fox in 1940, but Jean wasn't just another pretty face. From the beginning, she insisted on roles that didn't box her in. She refused to play dumb or helpless. She even turned down early roles that required her to fake a heavy accent or overact. She wasn't loud, she didn't have to be. Gene Tierney walked into a room and the silence did the rest. By the end of 1940, she'd left Broadway behind and Hollywood was just starting to realize what it had on its hands. Fox signs a starlet. She signed with 20th Century Fox in 1940, and the studio wasted no time molding her into a screen icon. She was 20, fresh from Broadway, and already had a reputation for being impossible to ignore. Her first film under Fox was The Return of Frank James, opposite Henry Fonda. She played Eleanor Stone, an aspiring newspaper reporter. Not exactly the most dazzling part, but it worked. Audiences noticed her, and the studio noticed the box office. Fox knew they had a gold mine, but in the 1940s, a contract meant more than a paycheck. It meant ownership. Studio heads picked your scripts, shaped your public image, and even told you who to date. Jean played along, but she didn't bend easily. She refused to change her name or pluck her eyebrows, which became one of her trademarks. In 1941, she starred in Tobacco Road, followed by Belle Starr, where she played a gunslinging Southern rebel. Both films were hits, but critics weren't kind. Some called her stiff. Others said she was just a face. Behind the scenes, she was quietly taking acting lessons and studying other performers on set. She never wanted to be just a decoration. Fox pushed her harder. By 1942, she was headlining films like Sundown and Rings on Her Fingers, moving quickly between dramas and comedies. The studio plastered her face on posters, pitched her as the most beautiful woman in film, and paired her with big names to boost her status. She didn't complain. She worked constantly. Between 1940 and 1943, she appeared in 9 films, some forgettable, some not. What mattered was the build-up. Zanuck believed Jean was one breakout role away from being a household name. He was right. By the end of 1943, Tierney had clawed her way out of bit parts and into something rare, leading lady status without playing by all the rules. She didn't flirt with the press. She didn't chase controversy. She showed up, hit her marks, and let the camera do the talking. Hollywood was full of loud starlets. Gene Tierney just stood still, and the world came to her. scandalized in Heaven Can Wait. In 1943, Gene Tierney starred in Heaven Can Wait, a Technicolor fantasy comedy that didn't scream career-defining role, but that's exactly what it became. Directed by Ernst Lubitsch, the film was a polished, high-society romp. Gene played Martha Straubel Van Cleve, a loyal wife who endures a lifetime of her husband's nonsense with quiet dignity and style. Audiences saw something different. She wasn't just beautiful, she was luminous. Critics finally softened. The Los Angeles Times said she outshone the sets, which were designed to look like actual heaven. People couldn't stop talking about her face, her poise, her voice. She seemed untouchable. But the praise came with a strange undercurrent. Behind the camera, Gene was struggling with how Hollywood wanted to present her. The studio insisted she pose for increasingly provocative photo spreads. One publicist described her appeal as elegance with danger. She was uncomfortable with the wardrobe choices but agreed, until one publicity still, showing her in a clingy satin gown, exploded in newspapers across the country. That photo was everywhere. Letters poured in. Some fans were outraged. Others were obsessed. Tierney became the center of unwanted attention. She didn't do interviews about the photo. She didn't complain publicly. But friends later said she hated how that moment changed her image. Studio executives, however, saw dollar signs. The photo in the film cemented her as both a movie star. She was nominated for a National Board of Review award. Suddenly, Gene was headlining every fashion article and fan magazine. Her phone rang nonstop. Directors wanted her. Journalists chased her. She was now the face of a new kind of leading lady, refined, smart, but sold to the public with a wink. Gene didn't fight the wave, but she didn't trust it either. She once told a friend, "They talk about you like you're a painting they just hung." It wouldn't be long before that painting started haunting people. Laura Sparks' obsession. If Heaven Can Wait turned Gene Tierney into a star, Laura, 1944, made her a legend and a ghost. Directed by Otto Preminger, the film was a psychological noir where Gene played the title character, a woman so enchanting that even her supposed death couldn't stop men from falling in love with her. In the movie, a detective investigates her death, only to become obsessed with her portrait. The twist? She's not actually dead. She walks in halfway through the film, alive and graceful, stunning the audience, and him. That portrait became iconic. In real life, it was a photograph touched up to look like a painting. But for many, it didn't matter. Gene became Laura. Strangers wrote letters claiming to have fallen in love with her character. A few even claimed they'd dreamed about her. The obsession crossed into unsettling territory. One man reportedly wrote to Fox requesting the painting for his bedroom. Another sent marriage proposals weekly. Gene didn't find it flattering. She found it eerie. The film was a hit. Critics hailed it as one of the best mysteries of the decade. Gene's performance was praised for being both icy and vulnerable, controlled but emotionally loaded. The camera barely moved when she was on screen. It didn't need to. She received praise from her toughest critic, the press. Even The New Yorker, known for snubbing studio stars, admitted she had an uncanny presence. But the film's success came at a cost. The more people adored Laura, the less they seemed to care about Gene Tierney. The studio leaned in. More posters, more portraits, more mystery woman headlines. Behind the scenes, Gene began feeling erased by the very image that made her famous. Tyrone Power and Tragedy. In 1946, Gene Tierney began a romance with Tyrone Power, one of the biggest male stars in Hollywood. He was charming, impossibly handsome, and just as boxed in by fame as she was. They met at a dinner party and clicked immediately. But behind the polished smiles, their connection wasn't smooth. Power had recently returned from World War II service and was emotionally distant. Jean had just wrapped several grueling film projects and was emotionally fragile. Still, they dated quietly for over a year, often traveling to Mexico or sneaking around the studio system's ever-present photographers. She once said he was the only man I ever really loved. Their relationship stalled when Tyrone left to film Captain from Castile Abroad. Jean hoped he'd return ready for marriage. Instead, he came back with distance and a different story. His family reportedly didn't approve of Jean. She wasn't high society enough, despite her upbringing. That rejection crushed her. In 1947, he ended things for good. Jean spiraled. Friends noticed she stopped going out. One co-star said she seemed unreachable. She buried herself in work, but felt abandoned and humiliated. Power's next marriage to a Latin actress, Linda Christian, was a public spectacle. Jean stayed silent but didn't hide her heartbreak from those closest to her. The loss wasn't just personal, it was public. Gossip columns had speculated for months about a wedding that never happened. She became the subject of what went wrong stories and cruel headlines about women being too cold or too controlling. Looking back, it wasn't just a breakup. It was the first public crack in the image Jean had spent years building. The woman who could make men fall in love with a painting had been left behind by the real thing. She never dated Tyrone again, but she never got over him either. Motherhood and silent pain. In 1943, at the height of her fame, Jean Tierney became pregnant with her first child, Daria. She was thrilled. She'd married fashion designer Oleg Cassini earlier that year, and for once, her life seemed steady. But something went horribly wrong. While attending a Hollywood canteen event for soldiers during her early pregnancy, a female fan approached her. The woman had been sick with rubella, German measles, but snuck out of quarantine just to meet Jean. The star, not knowing the risk, greeted her kindly and posed for a photo. Months later, Jean gave birth to Daria. The baby was born blind, partially deaf, and severely developmentally disabled. Doctors confirmed the cause: prenatal exposure to rubella. Jean was devastated. The guilt nearly consumed her. She blamed herself, even though she'd had no idea what had happened until after the fact. Her marriage to Cassini started to crack under the pressure. They argued constantly about treatment, care, and guilt. Cassini wanted to send Daria to a private facility for long-term care. Jean resisted, but eventually agreed, knowing she couldn't give the child the care she needed alone. The fan who exposed her? Years later, that woman approached Jean again, this time at a book signing, and confessed. Jean was polite but shaken. She simply responded, "You have given me the most dreadful sorrow of my life." She almost never spoke about Daria publicly. When she did, it was brief and tightly controlled. She visited her daughter often, sometimes bringing toys or books, but always leaving in tears. This tragedy became a private burden that followed Jean through every film, every red carpet, every fake smile. She kept working, kept showing up, but something behind her eyes had changed. Her fans saw glamour. Her peers saw sadness. One friend said she didn't wear grief, it lived in her voice. Mental hospitals and recovery. By the early 1950s, Jean Tierney was unraveling. The press didn't report it yet, but people on set noticed. She forgot lines, lost weight, and sometimes froze during scenes. She had trouble sleeping. She cried without warning. After finishing The Left Hand of God in 1955, she walked away from Hollywood. She tried to recover privately. Doctors diagnosed her with manic depression, now known as bipolar disorder. She was prescribed barbiturates and given rest orders, but nothing worked. Her mood swung hard, elation one day, despair the next. Friends described her as distant, ghostly. In 1957, she voluntarily admitted herself to the Harkness Pavilion in New York, a psychiatric clinic. When her condition didn't improve, she was moved to the Institute of Living in Connecticut. There, she underwent over 20 rounds of electroconvulsive therapy. She later said she lost big chunks of her memory, including entire scripts and moments from childhood. She stayed in institutions on and off for years. During one break in 1958, she attempted a comeback by working in a department store under a false name. When a customer recognized her, tabloids ran with the story, "Jean Tierney broke, working retail." The truth was more complex. She was trying to feel normal again. The press framed it as a fall from grace. But behind the scenes, she was slowly rebuilding. Therapy helped. Medication changed. She reconnected with friends and even wrote letters to Dahlia again. She eventually made a cautious return to public life. Not everyone welcomed her back, but some directors remembered what she was capable of. She wasn't cured, but she was stronger. She said later, "You don't come back the same, but you come back." JFK, romance rumors fly. Jean Tierney and John F. Kennedy crossed paths long before he became president. Their connection began in 1946, shortly after Kennedy returned from World War II and was newly elected to Congress. At the time, Jean was separated from her husband, Oleg Cassini, and trying to balance fame, heartbreak, and motherhood. They met through mutual friends in the political and Hollywood circles that often overlapped. Kennedy was young, charismatic, and ambitious. Jean, still recovering emotionally, found comfort in his charm. Their relationship developed quietly. There were dinners, long conversations, and a few public appearances. It wasn't a tabloid frenzy, but insiders noticed. By some accounts, their relationship grew serious. There were rumors of marriage. Jean was Catholic. So was Kennedy. But there was a problem. She was a divorcee, and his political advisors weren't thrilled. Marrying a divorced Hollywood actress didn't exactly align with a clean-cut public image, especially not for a man eyeing the White House. Kennedy ended the relationship. Politely but clearly. Jean was devastated, though she never spoke ill of him. In her memoir, she referred to a man who ended things due to ambitions beyond personal happiness. Most readers understood who she meant. By the time JFK was elected president in 1960, Jean had moved on, at least publicly. She eventually remarried, leaving Hollywood behind for a quieter life in Texas. The media tried to link them again in the early 60s, but those were just recycled rumors from years past. There was no rekindling, no late-night visits to the White House, no secret second chapter. Come back and advise and consent. In 1962, after years out of the spotlight, Jean Tierney returned to the screen in Advise and Consent, a political drama directed by Otto Preminger, the same man who once directed her in Laura. This wasn't a glamour role. She played the poised wife of a senator, with measured dialogue and a quiet presence. But that was the point. Preminger knew Jean's story. He gave her the role not just for her talent, but as a statement. She still belonged on screen. The film itself was bold, touching on blackmail, government secrets, and even hinted at scandals. Jean held her own alongside heavyweights like Henry Fonda and Charles Lawton. Critics noticed. They praised her restraint, her confidence, and her refusal to overplay a part that could have easily been forgettable. The New York Times said her scenes added a sense of real-world dignity. But Jean's comeback wasn't just about performance, it was about survival. She had weathered a public mental health battle, a divorce, family estrangement, and the brutal judgment of an industry that didn't give second chances to women over 40. She wasn't there to prove she could still be beautiful. She was there to show she was still standing. After Advise and Consent, she made a few more appearances. Nothing major, just select roles. She didn't need the fame anymore. She'd tasted all of it, good and bad. By the mid-1960s, Jean quietly retired from film. She remarried, lived in Houston for a while, and kept her distance from Hollywood drama. She hosted charity events, visited her daughter, and stayed out of the headlines. But for those who watched Advise and Consent, that short return was more than a cameo. It was a quiet reclaiming of a career on her own terms. Secrets revealed in memoir. In 1979, Jean Tierney did something most classic Hollywood stars avoided. She told the truth. Her memoir, Self-Portrait, hit shelves without glamour shots and without the usual spin. It was raw, direct, and devastating. She didn't open with her film roles or red carpets. She opened with Dahlia. She explained the rubella exposure, the birth complications, and the years of guilt that followed. She described the breakdowns, the shock therapy, and the shame that came with losing control in public. "People think a breakdown is falling apart," she wrote. "Sometimes it's just going numb." She called out the studio system for treating actors like property. She named names, carefully, but clearly. She admitted that at one point she wanted to end her life. She didn't glorify it. She didn't dramatize it. She just said it plainly and moved on. The most surprising part? She didn't sound bitter. Her voice was calm, even wry. She talked about fame as a mirror that never tells the truth. She joked about therapy and described psychiatrists the way other people describe bad directors. Politely, but with a sting. Readers were stunned. This wasn't the Jean Tierney they thought they knew. This wasn't Laura or Heaven Can Wait. This was a woman who had been adored, damaged, institutionalized, ignored, and still found the nerve to say, "Here's what really happened." The book became a quiet hit. It didn't top bestseller lists, but it passed from reader to reader. Film historians called it one of the most honest books to come out of Golden Age Hollywood. Young actresses read it to understand what the business really cost. Jean Tierney didn't give fans the version of herself they wanted. She gave them the truth, and somehow that made her unforgettable all over again.